So as we lead up to Easter this year, we are taking a look at the different events that took place in and around Holy Week, this special week that took place between Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, where he was hailed as a king, and his death and resurrection only a week later. And our story for today actually takes us a little bit outside of that week. The story of the anointing at Bethany takes place right before Jesus rides into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. And in this story, it involves a family that's pretty well known in the Bible, this family of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And there's a few different stories that include this family interacting with Jesus. There's a story of Jesus visiting Mary and Martha, where Mary sits at Jesus' feet the whole time that he's there, while Martha sort of works around the house with them. And then, of course, there's the famous story of when Lazarus passes away, and they call to the Lord and have him come. And when he shows up and finds out that Lazarus has died, there's the famous line that Jesus weeps. But then they go to the tomb and they open it up, and Jesus calls Lazarus out, and he raised him from the dead, even though he had been dead for a few days at that point. And so this is the same family that Jesus comes to visit right before riding into Jerusalem. So he comes to this small town of Bethany that's right outside Jerusalem, and they make a dinner for him. And some of his disciples are there with them as well. And so while they are lying down at the table and relaxing, Mary comes in with this expensive fragrant oil that would have been made with olive oil at the base, and then they added this expensive spice called spikenard that was really expensive, but it made the oil smell really beautiful. So she comes in and she pours that oil on Jesus' feet and uses her hair to rub the oil in as an act of love and honor to Jesus for all that he is and all that he's done for their family. And as he does this, one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who later on becomes the disciple who betrays Jesus and sells him away so that he is crucified and dies, he calls out and says, "Why are we doing this? Why didn't we sell this oil for 300 denarii and give to the poor?" Now, 300 denarii was a lot of money in those days. A denarius was about a day's wages for someone who was working. So you think about 300 denarii, that's almost a year's salary. I mean, this is a really expensive oil that she used. And he's saying, why didn't we sell this oil and instead take the money we could have made and given it to the poor? Now, let me ask a question. Was there anything wrong with Mary wanting to use this oil to anoint Jesus' feet? Think about that. This is the Lord. She was doing this as a way to honor him. She had this expensive oil, and she decided she wanted to use it in this way. And I think we'd all probably agree there's nothing wrong with doing that. This is an act of worship. This is an act of showing the Lord how important he is. And in the teachings for the new church, we're told that oil represents our loves. And so what's represented in this act of taking this oil and pouring it on Jesus' feet is when we do something out of our own loves. And feet in the word represent what is natural. I mean, if you think about it, the feet are the part of our body that is constantly touching the earth. And so what's represented here is that when we take something from our loves, we feel inspired in our heart to do something good, an outward action on the natural level. So that's what's represented here, is when we have a desire in our will to do something good. And this is a good thing, right? There's nothing wrong with doing that. We should support people who want to do something good from their own heart. But at the same time, was Judas wrong? Could they have sold that for 300 denarii and then used that to help a bunch of poor people? Is there anything wrong with doing that, with selling something expensive and using that money to support people who need it? No, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, Judas's idea was a good idea in its own way. But we're told in the story, there's a couple of signs that we're not supposed to listen to Judas, that his idea was wrong. The first one is that Jesus himself says, don't listen to Judas. He says, no, there's nothing wrong with this. We should support her in doing this. But the other part is it tells us explicitly in the story that Judas offered this idea not because he loves the poor and wants to help the poor, but because he's selfish. That he was the person who was in charge of keeping track of all of their money. And so if they had sold that for 300 denarii, he could have taken some of that money and put it in his own pockets. So even though there's nothing wrong with his suggestion, we know that it's not coming from a good place. And so here we are with these two ideas. We have this expensive oil, and we have an idea that we could use this oil to anoint the Lord's feet and do this act of love to Jesus right there in the moment. Or we have this other idea that we could sell it and take that money and give it to the poor. And we know that one of these is a good idea that we're supposed to listen to, and one of them is a bad idea. It's coming from a bad place. And what this really shows us, what this story is demonstrating, is what it feels like when we go through a state of temptation. In a state of temptation, we have this balance between ideas coming in from one side that are good, that are trying to get us to do good things, and ideas coming in from the other side that are bad, that are telling us to do bad things. And our reading this morning from the work Heaven and Hell talks about how we exist in this balance, that there's always influences coming to us from heaven and from hell all the time, that we are constantly living in this state where we can choose what is right or what is wrong. But I think what's so powerful about this story is it shows that temptations aren't always straightforward, right? It's not always as obvious as, okay, should I say something nice to this person or should I say something mean to this person? That's a pretty obvious choice where we all know what's right and what's wrong. Or, okay, should I steal this candy bar from the store or should I go to the counter and pay for it? Again, that's really obvious. We know what's right and what's wrong there. But there's times where we might face a temptation or a spiritual conflict where we're just not sure what the right answer is. Do we take this expensive oil and use it to anoint the Lord's feet? Well, that's something that's good, that's useful. Or should I take it and sell it and use that money to help the poor? Well, that's also good, that's also useful. And so we sit here and we say, I'm not sure which of these I'm supposed to do. And what's meant here is Jesus' words at the end are kind of strange, right? He has this phrase about the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have with you always. And that feels like a strange thing to hear from the Lord, right? It sounds like he's saying, well, don't worry about the poor. But that's not really what he means. What's demonstrated in this story is one of the ways that the hells try to get us to give in states of temptation. In our reading from the New Jerusalem and its heavenly doctrine, it talked about how the hells attack us during states of temptation. And it's not just that they give us these ideas and say, do something bad. It's that they try to get into our head and try to tell us excuses why it's not worth doing something good. And that's what Judas is doing here, right? He's like, well, what you did was good, but it could have been even better. You know, you just wasted this oil on one person when we could have sold that oil and helped all of these different people. And these are thoughts that we have all the time. This idea that, okay, I'm inspired and I want to do something good, but we might feel like, well, it's not going to make any difference. You know, what good is it to donate $1 to the church when there's other people donating 100 or 1,000? My $1 is useless, so I shouldn't even do it. Well, what good is it to help one person when I could take that energy and go somewhere else and try to help a bunch of people? So I'm not going to help this one person right here. The hells do this by making it seem like we're trying to do the right thing, but really what they're doing is convincing us to turn away from these good ideas. And so this is what Jesus means with those words, the poor you have with you always. He's not saying don't worry about the poor, don't care about other people. What he's saying is there will always be more that you could be doing, right? Every single good act that we do, we could add on to it. We could do it bigger and better. But he's saying, but me, you don't have always. And that's another strange thing. It's not that the Lord isn't with us all the time. He is always present with us. He is always trying to lead us. But our willingness to see him, how open we are to the Lord, comes and goes. And so his point is, when you have a moment of inspiration, when you feel inspired in your heart to do something good, even if it's small, just do it. Don't let these thoughts get into your head and say, well, that's not good enough. You need to wait and save your energy for something bigger and better. I mean, we could all do this. We could say this with just going to church, right? It's a good thing for us to come to church every Sunday and be here and hear these messages from the Word and learn from the Lord, right? But couldn't we also say, yeah, but what good does it really do for us to all come and we just sit in these pews and listen and then have snacks afterwards for ourselves? Wouldn't it be so much better if every Sunday we all got together and went down to the soup kitchen and served a bunch of people? Wouldn't that do so much more than what we're doing in here this morning? But the Lord's point is, maybe, sure, there's always more you could do. But there's nothing wrong with doing something right when you feel inspired to do it. If you feel inspired to go to church and hear a message and that helps you, then do it. Don't worry about if it's big enough. Don't worry about if there's bigger things that you could be doing. If what you're doing is good, then do it. And I think the most powerful line of this whole story is it says that when Mary pours this oil on Jesus' feet, it says the fragrance filled the room. And I think this is the big point of this story, that even when we do these small acts of kindness, even in these small things, there is an effect on all of the people around us. The way that a fragrance can fill the room. These acts of love can affect all of the people around us. When someone we know is helped, it affects us and inspires us. When we receive help from someone else, it affects us and it inspires us. And if we live in a community of people who help each other, who care about each other, who do nice things for each other, that affects all of us. And that fills the room with this beautiful scent, the way that the oil does. It fills our community with this beautiful aura of love. And that's what this story is all about. That when we feel this tension in our mind between these two ideas, when we have an inspiration to do something good, even if it's small and seemingly insignificant, when we hear those voices in our heads saying, no, you have to do something better, you have to grow, you have to do more than this, don't listen to that voice and use that as an excuse to stop ourselves from doing something good. The Lord's message is, when He's with us, when we feel His love inspiring us to do something even small and insignificant, just do it. And there's power in even the smallest acts. And when we all do this, when we all focus on just doing these little things that we are inspired to do, that is what helps bring the Lord's presence with us and with everyone around us. Amen. Please rise for a blessing in the closing of the word.